So now we're looking at how to teach the Bible using notes. What I'm actually going to say is how to not use notes. Okay, now I appreciate that when you teach people how to teach the Bible, when you start talking about not using notes, I appreciate that a lot of us start being like, oh, wait a minute. I like the other stuff, but no, I'm not going to do this. Right? And that was how I was, when I did a communication workshop run by Richard Garnett at Oak Hill College. I said to him at the beginning, I said, look, mate, it ain't going to happen, And I said, listen, I preach for 45 minutes to an hour sometimes. And I said, and it's in-depth exegesis in my sermons. And I said, there's no way you're getting me doing that without notes. And he was very patient. And he said, can I just ask you, just give it a go for these 3 days and then do what you want afterwards. And I went, all right then. And at the end of the 3 days, I'm like, I'm never using notes again. So I would just ask you to be patient with me whilst I suggest that there's a way you can teach without using notes, even if that sounds crazy to you. And that was why we sent you a link to an article from the guy who had noticed that on the TED Talks, they have certain guidelines for teaching. Now, those of you who don't know what TED Talks are, TED Talks, there's a website, is it TED.com? I think it's TED.com, where you just have people sharing interesting ideas, and they go up on the stage, and normally they don't talk for more than like sort of 18 minutes. Sometimes they do. There's some ones that I think might be longer. And they communicate an idea, and a lot of them are really good at communicating. Now, it's interesting, as you watch it over, like I don't like watching the TED Talk stuff from 2003 that much. Like there's one guy who's there, he's got great stuff he's sharing, but he's got his laptop there, and he keeps pressing the space bar to do the next keynote slide, And he's like this, so you see that, press the next one. Now, back a few years ago, people did that. None of the good communicators these days do that, right? Now, the good communicators these days, you don't see them with their notes. You don't see them with a computer doing PowerPoint or anything like that. And the way they communicate is so clear. But I gave you this article because I wanted you to hear that from someone else about some of the tips that TED Talks give their speakers before they talk, so that you're not just thinking, oh, this is a Duncan thing. I just want you to understand how the people who have thought real hard about how to communicate ideas effectively, these are some of the things they're saying. Okay, and one of the things does anyone remember anything from the article that they said that stuck in your mind?
Yeah, so use visuals, so use pictures that illustrate a point, but use very little words.
Excellent. So they were saying when you do use your PowerPoint or your keynote, use pictures to back up what you're saying, but don't use text. If you have to use text, use a very tiny amount of text. Who's the guy who's world famous for how he does keynote/PowerPoint presentations? Steve Jobs. You watch Steve Jobs do it, there's almost no text, right? As he's talking, just stuff pops up, a picture of something that backs up what he's saying, and you can see it, and it reinforces what he's saying, as opposed to the way I used to use PowerPoint back in the day, where my text comes up, and you've got to try and read them words, and you've got to hear me talking about it at the same time. And that's very 1990s, or the noughties. I don't know, I lose track of what decade was what, but okay, so, right, great. Anything else from the article that struck you?
Draw people into caring.
Draw people into caring.
So it sounded like their way of explaining SGF.
So it sounded like their way of viewing the FCF thing. Excellent. Anything else? Timing.
So less is more.
Less is more. Mm-hmm.
And making lists in collaboration, so doing that not as like a lone ranger, but actually with somebody who's not an expert in the field, you just go through it together.
So that would be a bit like our doing theology in community. The other thing I thought was just the whole thing where he says podiums are a thing of the past. And I've noticed that a lot lately as I've been watching communicators. The only people I see stand in front of a podium are Bible teachers. Now, you might be thinking, what about Barack Obama? when you see or certain politicians in America who are good public speakers, I personally don't think the UK politicians are great public speakers. I think they give a very old school way of communicating. But in the States, I've seen some guys teaching with a Perspex podium, so it doesn't look like a barrier so much. And you have these Perspex teleprompters as well, don't you? So you can't even see they're looking at it. But anyway, let's get on with this.
You suggested that we preach without a pulpit to beat.
Without a pulpit to hit, yeah.
Still call it pulpit.
Beat the pulpit.
All right. So my first question is, who uses notes? So in your culture, when do you see people using notes? Quick answer.
Teachers.
Lectures.
Lawyers.
Lawyers,
Politicians.
teachers, politicians. Okay. Next question is it inspiring to see someone looking at their notes? Now, if you are a bit defensive about the fact you use notes, don't defend it. Just answer the question: is it inspiring when you see someone looking at their notes?
Depends who it is.
Yeah.
Depends who it is. Okay.
So Piper's really good at it.
Do you see? Oh no. The question was: is it inspiring to see someone looking at their notes?
Right. Okay. Now I've got you. Right. No.
So you just mentioned John Piper. When have you ever seen Piper look at his notes? Right.
Sometimes it can be, depending on what they come up with when they do. Like, I'm thinking about, in terms of, let's say you're in court, there is that, sometimes there's that a bit more confidence in a person who seems to have stuff laid out in front of them.
Oh, that's not the question, though. The question is it inspiring to see someone looking at... This is in the context of someone talking.
No.
When you see someone without them notes, you they're more fluid, aren't they? And
Yeah.
you get caught up with that. Whereas when people I know, just listening to myself after I've used notes, you're looking back and I feel deflated watching myself after using notes. So with somebody else, you feel even more deflated. Well, I feel more deflated watching someone.
I think, taking up from Harriet's point, I think there's certain times when somebody looking at their notes inspires me in that they've prepared. So I can feel inspired as though, well, this person's thought about it. And the fact that they're looking to their notes shows that they're being particular about the fact that they thought about it. You get what I mean? So I guess the particularness of it can, but maybe I'm just a random guy and it kind of catches me like that.
Fair enough. I think it could be different for different people. Myself, if I'm at a funeral and I see someone looking at notes, I'm cool with that. You know, if I see someone looking at notes at a funeral, I feel like probably they're not... Oftentimes at funerals you hear people speak who aren't used to public speaking, but it's a family member or a friend, so they're speaking, and I can see they're nervous, and they're looking at their notes. I'm inspired by the link they have with the person who's died. And I'm like, they've got a right to speak right now, I'm going to listen. In that context, it's not really an issue for me. But when it's a case where... for me, when it's preaching and when someone's making a really important point and they look at their notes and read out their notes to make the point, for me personally, that's uninspiring because I think, could be wrong, but in Duncan's mind, if you've got to look at your notes to tell me that, you don't live it and you don't believe it deep down. Now, I'm not saying that's true, but I'm saying the signals you're sending to me. So body language is incredibly important, right? But body language is really important. It's so important. It changes the way people perceive what you're saying. And when someone says to me, now look, guys, this is the most important thing. You must understand. You've got to get, if you don't get this, you're going to be living your Christian life all wrong. And this is it. Right, okay, so right there, I've just communicated what to you? That I don't know it either, so I'm living my Christian life wrong. You know, now it sounds like I just prepared this last night, and I'm telling you, you've got to know this is so important. I only learnt this last night, and I haven't really learned it yet. I heard someone say once that you don't really know something till you've taught it a couple of times. So hence what I'm going to teach you to do, so that you can teach it and you know it and it's coming from here and it's not just coming from your notes. You don't want to do what I've done in many sermons back in the day where I've got a banging sermon sitting on my hard drive, but if you now said to me, "Sir Duncan, tell me about that chapter in Matthew," I'd be like, "Oh, I can't tell you, but I know I did a lot of good exegesis for it, and if I can just go on my computer, I'll find you all that good stuff." Instead, I want it to be the case that you've got it in here.
Can I just, in regard to that example, I think your point is absolutely right, and it feels like it was a bit of a caricature of the point in order to make the point, in that if you look down at your notes and then looked up and shared the point, to me that's different to you looking down at your notes and reading the point. Obviously, you reading the point doesn't communicate as effectively as you sharing the point. But the fact that you would have looked down at your notes before sharing it wouldn't have deterred me. But I would want you to share, especially that point, I would want you to look up and look at me and share the point.
So I view it as a matter of levels. So I would say, saying, look, this is really important, you have to know this, your Christian life, and then having to look at it, for me, that's level 1 negative. Yeah, and then you look up and you say it, that's just level 1 negative. But if you look down and read it out as well, that's level 2 negative. So I see them as both heading in the wrong direction of what we should be doing as preachers. So I see it as going in the wrong direction. I also see, I'll come back to one of my arguments for the whole FCF thing. You read the book of Galatians. That's a FCF orientated letter, that the epistles tend to be, they got one thing, they don't go down all the different rooms of the corridor and all that. They focus on one thing they're trying to communicate. Now, I like to get a lot of my ideas for how we teach based on the Bible. And the same way, I'm not aware of when people are teaching in the Bible, when they're preaching to crowds and that, getting notes and going through that. As far as I'm aware, that's not how they taught. Maybe I'm wrong. Someone can correct me on that if I'm wrong. But in terms of like the caricature, here's the thing. And I'll come on to my next point here. Some people can use notes without it looking like they're using notes, and some people can't. Now, here's the thing. If you grew up in church watching people read notes, and if you've been reading your notes and using notes to teach for a long time, let me tell you something. You have a certain, don't take this the wrong way, I've been there. You, and I did, have a certain amount of blindness about how ineffective you are in your teaching. Okay, so here was me a few years ago, right? I asked someone about this communication workshop I'm going on. Oh, hey, they teach you how to teach without notes. This guy says to me, yeah. I said, do you think it's worth it? He goes, look, if you're a good teacher anyway, you don't really need it. And I'm like, I'm a pretty good Bible teacher. I didn't say that to him, In my head, I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty good, What I did say to him, this friend of mine, I said, well, you know what? I'm one of them guys. I use notes, but I teach in a way where it don't really look like I'm using notes. That was what I thought. That's what I thought, I'm like, look, the way I use notes, you don't really notice that much. Then I learned this stuff about teaching without notes, started teaching without notes. Now I find it very painful if I ever have to look at an old sermon of mine, like when we're like re-rendering videos and that to make them HD quality and stuff like that for the website. And I'm like, this guy is so boring. What are you doing with those notes? Why'd you just look at that note? Like, you knew that. You didn't need to look at your bit of paper. Oh, my days. Yeah. And so what I want to say is my eyes got opened. And now I've been affected in a way that I see notes now and I'm like, So I see a man like Michael McIntyre on the TV do his comedy show. And he's chatting about loads of real life stuff. And I'm connecting with him. He's connecting with me. And he don't have any notes whatsoever. This is heavy. Then I'm like, okay, I want to watch a sermon. And I go watch a sermon on the internet. And so this is what I said wasn't caricatures at all, because I've been watching lots of sermons, getting an idea of where preaching's at in 2014 in this country. And I'm watching a sermon, and so often I'm like, this is so dry. But I know this person can do so much better. But their notes are really holding them back. Now, that's my opinion. But what I'm saying is be patient with me for today. And then later maybe you can say, do you know what? You're all into that not using notes thing, but nah, that's just your own quirk. I'm going to ignore that. That's cool. That's cool.
Say if you use your troll thinking, is it helpful to have your notes as backups? So like, let's say like you're preaching and you kind of forget what you wanted to say, go down, look at it, and then continue.
I'm not saying don't have notes for backup, and I'm also not actually saying don't use notes at all. So we're going to be sending you, if we haven't done it already, we're going to be sending you a link of a guy called Alain de Botton, I don't know. A very posh guy, so when you watch the video, you might be like, why you got us watching him? But this guy's gangster in that, and this was quite a few years ago, but he looks like he's preaching without notes, and then you see him go like that. He's got a stack of cue cards, and he's just glanced to see, I don't know what's written on his cue card, I don't know if it's a picture or something, or a word or something, but he just goes like that, puts the cue card to the bottom of a pile, boom, he's off. A few minutes later, boom, like that. That is, if you're a guy who's like, I have to have some kind of notes, I think that is a gangster way of having notes. And it didn't communicate to me, this guy don't know what he's talking about, just communicated to me, this is the way this guy rolls, he's making sure he stays on point, boom. But he really believes what he's talking about because he doesn't need to, his notes are just to remind him, what's the next point in the course? We're coming to that. When I say next point in the course, you might be like, what's that talking about? Let's move on to the next thing. So yeah, John Piper is very good at preaching without looking like he's preaching from notes. I would say that there's very few of us who can do that. I used to think, I never thought I was anything like John Piper, but I used to think I could preach without looking like I look notes. Now I look at stuff and I'm like, Okay, next point. And I realize this is unfair. I'm teaching the class, so I'm getting to have my say. So I appreciate some of you might be like, no, I don't agree. And I feel bad for you because it's like I'm in charge and you've got to listen to me. So sorry about that. I totally appreciate this is a very biased lesson. Point 2, do we write the same way we talk? No, sound like Chewbacca there. We don't write the same way we talk. Richard Garnett said to me, people who can write how they talk, like there's not many of them, and they've normally got jobs writing for the BBC and stuff like that. Because it's a real gift to be able to write the way people talk. In general, we don't do it. This was one of the problems with the way I used to teach, that I would type on a keyboard the sentence I was going to say, and then I would preach that sentence. But that's not the way I talk. And so it wasn't my natural personality coming out. It was Duncan's school system educated, word processing adjusted way of talking. Because I don't know if you've noticed this as well, but even the way that you type can affect the way that you write stuff, as opposed to even how you write with your hand. So have you ever seen an interesting person give a boring sermon? Well, I have. The chances are they were reading their notes, or their notes were written in a boring way. Those aren't the only factors, but I would say there's a lot of probability about that, reading their notes or their notes were written in a boring way. There are interesting people who write their notes in a boring way. That could be any of us. So here's my conclusion, right? Most of us will benefit from reducing the amount we use notes whilst teaching. Now, that must have been very uninspiring for you because I was looking down and reading out my my notes, right? Okay. And so if this is really important to me, I should just be able to say it without looking at my notes. But thank God, this is only me teaching about notes. It's not me teaching about the gloriousness of Jesus Christ. Okay. So, now I'm caricaturing. So let me give you Duncan's don'ts. Now, at first I just wrote don'ts, and I realized it's a bit legalistic, like saying you can't do this. So these are Duncan's don'ts. Yeah, these are my don'ts. These are your don'ts for your Bible teaching assignment, okay? Don't have your notes covering you up. Yeah, so please, when you do your Bible teaching assignment, don't have a stand in front of you with your notes like this, yeah, And please don't have it like this as well, covering up your torso. Yeah, because then I'm not seeing all of you. I'm just seeing a face, and I'm seeing these notes. I want to see you teaching. Yeah, there should be a bit of movement. There should be a little bit of movement up here. Unless you're one of those people that just in everyday life, even when you're really excited, like on your birthday and everything, you're totally still and you're like, oh, thank you so much for that present. That's amazing. If that's how you are in real life, then okay. But I'm expecting there will be a little bit of movement, okay? Don't worry, you're not moving too much. You're not moving too much. Yeah, there's been sermons where I've thought, wow, man, I was really full of the Holy Spirit during that sermon. I was like bouncing around and everything, yeah? And then later I see the video of it and I'm like, where's the bouncing around and everything? And really what it was is just kind of did that a couple of times, you know? And I'm like, I was on fire. So that is my Britishness coming through, you know? I'm thinking, oh, steady on, Duncan, you know? So don't worry, you're not like going all out of control. That's maybe some of you are, but I just think it's unlikely. Okay, another don't. Don't have your laptop covering you up. Yeah. So don't. This is something that's happened in the sort of young, restless, reformed community. I've noticed the last few years. It's only with apples for some reason, but people preaching like this. Okay. Now, it's very popular at the moment. Yeah, for some reason, if you're young, restless, and reformed, having an Apple is really popular as well, as in an Apple computer. On the Urban Ministry Program, when I get this laptop out and do this, I'm a little bit nervous about something. Anyone want to guess what it is?
What, the logo?
Yeah. I'm a bit nervous about this logo here. Why might I be a bit nervous about it?
That's the mark of the beast.
Okay, so no. So let's. There were two really good points there. I want to get both of them right. So Harriet, you said marketing, right?
No, please.
Oh.
No, they said market.
He said mark of the beast.
He said mark of the beast.
Did you say marketing? Promoting. Promoting. You said promoting, right? I have. So who's ever watched a movie and spotted product placement in it? Yeah, it's a bit irritating. It draws you out of the movie. You're like, they done a deal with Dell. You know, it's either a Dell laptop or an Apple laptop. And it's always one that isn't plugged in, and you're like, I know the battery don't last that long. You know? And so it distracts you from it. Now, I get concerned on the Urban Ministry Program that people see this, and not that they think it's product placement, but that it just reminds them of product placement, or that they think, oh, he's an Apple fanboy. Because I've even had people say it before, you're Apple fan. Now, those of you who know me well know I am far from an Apple fanboy. I use Apple products, and I'm a real cynic about Apple products at the same time. They really frustrate me, right? But I like them as well. So I'm concerned about that distracting from the quality of this course, okay? But there's another reason. So someone jokingly said mark of the beast, right? Now, here's the thing. We put our sermons on the internet. We get a variety of people watch them. We get a variety of emails from people and comments on YouTube videos, some of them quite interesting, showing that we have a broad spectrum of Christians watching the videos, okay? There are some people that if they saw this in one of our videos, they might say it's the mark of the beast. Now, they might not say it's the mark of the beast, but what might they say? What have some of you heard Christians say about this?
What, forbidden fruit?
Yeah, so some people say, look, this is a symbol of the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve took a bite out of the fruit, and they would say that Apple's using this as their marketing. So why would you have that in a Christian sermon? Some people would say it's actually that they might have a conspiracy theory that Apple is tied to devil worship, and this is why they have that symbol. Now, here's the thing. I don't know if that's true. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. But even if it weren't true, I'm like, it could be a stumbling block to people hearing the gospel by me having this up there. So then I wouldn't. Now, the other thing is, there have been articles written and even documentaries written on Apple being a what? Maybe. I'm thinking religion. So people have said how Apple has the apple, it has its symbol of worship. which is the Apple sign. It has its temples, which is the Apple store. It has its priests, which are the people that work in the Apple store, and so on. And it has its worshippers, because a lot of Apple, I'm not saying the majority, but there's a substantial number of Apple users that worship Apple. Blatantly. I mean, when I was a PC user and worked in a place where everyone used Mac, I got a real hard time for it. People were desperate to evangelize me and win me over. So here's the thing. So for me, now, you could turn around and say, look, those articles and documentaries about that's nonsense. Maybe you're right, but I don't want to be a stumbling block to anyone. I don't want anyone being he's caught up in that thing. So that's the Apple thing. Now let's say this wasn't an Apple laptop. It was just a black PC laptop that had no markings on it here, yeah? I still don't want it in front of you in your sermon, because it's a barrier between me and you. It's a barrier, it's a distraction. I want to see you. So one of my don'ts is don't have a laptop blocking you. So you won't need a laptop in front of you anyway. Okay, next don't is don't rustle notes. Yeah, so don't start rustling notes in the middle of your sermon. That's a distraction. The other one is don't have your notes out of order. That might sound obvious, but I've seen it a lot. Someone's preaching and they're like, and they start rearranging their notes. You don't want to do that in the middle of a sermon. It's distracting. And the other don't is don't keep looking at your notes. Don't keep looking at your notes. I think a lot of looking at notes is nerves, and I think if you have notes in front of you, you will look at them. It's like, does anyone remember having stabilizers on your bike when you were learning to ride? Someone at some stage tells you don't need the stabilizers no more. You're like, I do. And you're kind of scared about not using the stabilizers. If you do the process I'm teaching you, you won't need your notes as much as you think you do, but your nerves might tell you you need them. It's a bit like when I was a kid, I was practicing for the school play. I had to sing the Joseph song, right? You know, bring me my coloured coat. Okay? So I'd be in my flat, right, in the hallway, and I'd practice singing it, and my mum would be at the other end of the hallway, yeah, and she'd be like, go. And I'd always go, my mum would always go, Duncan, you don't need to cough. I'd be like, I do, I got to clear my throat. She'd be like, Duncan, it's nerves. I'd be like, no, I've got to clear my throat. Well, now I know she's telling the truth. Yeah, it was just nerves. It just, and it's funny, I see it with one of my kids as well, with Bible reading. Before reading the Bible, I always go, that's a nerve thing, right? Sometimes it's legit, but more times it's a nerve. Same way, your nerves will tell you, have a look at your notes, okay? But I think it's then going to make you less effective. You don't need your notes. Okay, if you do have to use notes, do what Alain de Botton did in his TED Talk in 2009, which was called A Kinder, Gentler Philosophy of Success. I've given you a link to it there if you want to see. He's the guy with the cue cards that just went like with that real quick. Okay, so that's my thing about notes. Now I'm going to give you the technique to preach without notes, okay? And this is going to help your God-given personality come through in your sermons. And I'm hoping that your sermons will be more like, I have a dream, and less like, I have a dream. Okay, so here's the technique for how you can learn to teach without notes, okay? You can all do this, right? Okay, first off, start with in-depth notes, a mind map or a manuscript. I use a mind map, but you can also do this just with a handwritten manuscript or with a word processed manuscript. You've got your in-depth notes here of what you want to say, yeah? This is what you've been doing already. Then make sure that each of these sections have an easy-to-read heading telling you what it's about, yeah? Now, it could be, your heading could be your ELP, yeah? Explain, link to FCF. It could be that. It could be a heading saying something like, Adam feels shame. That's your heading. And this is the bit where you're going to explain how Adam feels ashamed about his sin. It could be that, yeah? Or you could do, this is something I used to do when I was a teacher at South Thames College. And I remember when I got Ofsteded, they were like, oh, that's really good. We want to do that. And what I would do is I would put headings of my first phrase I was going to say. So it would be, I'd do speech marks and I'd say, so notice now how Adam deals with his shame. And then I go ... Now, what I found for me that worked really well, because I'll do this in all my lessons. I had a lesson plan, and for each section it would say, so now, guys, I want you to get into groups, or something like that. So I would just glance at my lesson plan, and I go, so now, guys, we're going to get into groups. Now, as soon as I've said that, my brain opens up the drawer that has all the information for what I've already written in my notes, and then it just flows. I'm like, yeah, this is the group exercise. Boom, and I can communicate like that. So you can put headings here whatever way works for you. Step 2, this is where it gets more fun. Stand up and practice teaching the intro, glancing at your notes as you do. So at this stage here, you've got all your notes and you've got little headings for each section reminding you what it's about. And now you're going to start trying to teach that sermon to no one, just in the room on your own, right? And you're going to stand up. Some of you are like, nah, I'll just do it sitting down. Listen, it will help you if you stand up. You'll stand up and you start off just with your intro, right? So you do the intro, yeah? And you practice teaching it. So you actually teach it. No one's there, but you practice saying it. And as you do, you're glancing at your notes, right? And you're almost going to be reading everything in your notes, almost. But you might find you can kind of look away from your notes a bit. That's okay. Then you're going to take one step forward, right? So any of you are like, no, I'm not going to stand up, I'll do it sitting down. Now you're like, oh, okay, that won't work, right? So now you're going to take another step forward, right? And now you're going to do the same thing, but this time not on your intro. This time you're going to do it on your first ELP, your first ELP, okay? So you've taken a step forward. You do it again. You're like glancing at your notes, yeah? You use your notes as much as you have to, but if you can, move away from your notes, yeah? And then you're going to take another step forward and you're going to do your next ELP. Then, guess what you're going to do? Take another step forward and do your next ELP. Now, people always say, well, what happens when I run out of room? So when you run out of room, yeah, you turn around, you take a step forward, you do your next ELP, yeah? Or you can go round in a circle in your room like this. Now you might be like, what is this? This is nuts. This is a technique for memorizing stuff. Now there's other ways of memorizing, but they haven't worked for me. So some people say, think of a journey you often go on, yeah, your journey to maybe the shops, and plan out stages of that journey and think what you would say at each part of the sermon along that way. For me personally, that doesn't work, yeah. My brain doesn't work that way. But for me, what works is standing up, taking a step forward, and so on. Okay, you keep doing this until you get to your conclusion. And now, when you've done all your ELPs and you're about to do your conclusion, what do you think you do next?
Crescendo to Christ.
What did you do, Jade? You take a step, and now you do your conclusion. You do your crescendo to Christ and whatnot. Glancing at your notes, using your notes as much as you have to. It's okay if you're just going to totally read out your notes. That's what you're going to do. That process is going to do wonders for getting the sermon in your head. Right, yeah. And now we come on to the next stage, yeah? Stage 8.
No, 7.
Stage 7. If any useful phrases came to your mind whilst practicing, write them in your notes. So this is what I find, yeah, in my living room, I say something, because I'm practicing preaching, and I say something, and I'm like, oh my days, that's good. And then I write that down. That just came to me. You know, it could, sometimes it's even just a whole new insight into something Jesus has done. And I'm like, wow, Jesus is amazing. I will write that down. I put that in. Sometimes I'm reading my notes out, I'm like, oh, that's an awkward way of saying it. And then I change it. Yeah, and then I change it so it's more natural way of saying it. Now, here's another little tip. When I write my notes in my mind map, I intentionally don't write proper. So when I say with, I write W-I-V, with, because it's with. The times when I get muddled and tongue-tied when I'm doing public speaking is when I try to pronounce my THs. I had a real hard time with THs in school. They kept me back with reading and everything. You know, I love reading at home and everything, but in school, they kept me back at the bottom. They wouldn't let me go on to the green books. I was stuck on the yellow books. They just kept saying, it's the, and I go, duh. And they go, it's the, and I go, duh. You know, everyone on the estate said duh, but in the church school down the road, everyone said the. And I just thought they were nuts. I was like, why does the teacher keep going, the? I was like, well, you know, I couldn't get it, right? Now, I learned later how to say the, but it's not natural to me. I have to think about it to do it. And when I'm trying to be polite with people, I often try to say the, because I think it will communicate to them I'm being really polite, right? But then I do it for F's and PHs. So I say, when I instead of saying Pharaoh in sermons before, I've gone like, now Pharaoh, you know. So what I've learned is, no, I just got to be me. I've got to be me. I don't say with. I say with. So when I write it, I write W-I-V. When I say what, in my mind, what is spelt, guess how? W-O-T. Why is there an H in it and an A? They don't need that. So I write W-O-T because it helps me be real to what I am. Yeah, which is hard for me because in my childhood, my accent kept getting mixed up through various circumstances. So it's always hard for me to know how I am supposed to talk. But basically, I know that what is W-O-T. I'm staying true to that. I say cause, I don't say because. Sometimes I say because. But when I'm writing, I'll write C-O-S, cause, because that's me. I try to keep it real like that. I don't try to write it the way your English teacher in school wanted you to write stuff. I want to write the way I talk. Okay. Step 9 now.
Step 8.
Sorry.
Step 8? Step 8.
Does that principle also remain true for rafting?
Rafting?
For raft.
Oh, raft. I don't even know how we're saying it now.
Just say God will smash bread, isn't it?
So, step 8. Now write up a second draft that just has headings. So now you're going to do your second draft, but check it out. You don't need all those notes now. Now you just need your headings that you had in the first place. So now you're going to stand up, take a step. You're going to start with your intro, but now all you need to look at is a heading. You have a piece of paper or something that has the heading that says, when I was a kid, I went on a camp and there was some beef with these other kids. Boom. I know the rest of the story because it's my story. I come up with it when I was writing my intro. I know that story. I've told that story before around the dinner table with my kids. I don't need to read the story. I just need the heading. So now I'm standing up. I look at that line. I remember a time when I went on a kids camp, and there was some beef with some other kids. I just look at that, and then I go, I remember when I was on a kids camp, and there was some beef with some other kids, yeah? And what happened? One of the boys said he wanted to make up and be friends and all that, so I went out in the middle, and he went to shake my hand, and I carry on the rest of the story. Okay, so that was last Sunday's sermon. So that's all I needed. I needed that heading. And I know that my intros consist of... What does the intro consist of? Feb. F-E-B. F is the FCF, E is the empathy, and B is bring it to the Bible. So even if I forget what the rest of my notes are, I'm now like, there's some empathy coming up. What's the empathy? And then I can be like, yeah, I know the empathy, and I can say that empathy. Then I'm like, B, bring it to the Bible. So let's see what the Bible says about this today. And then boom, I've just done my intro. Now I take another step, and I glance down at now walking through the text, and I'm looking at my first ELP, and all I need now is one line, one sentence that gives me the title of that ELP. And then I go boom, and I go through it, yeah? Now, if you get stuck, try to remember it, and then just look at your notes and be like, what was it? Oh, yeah. And then come back into it. Now, as you do it this time as well, you will find you're more natural. And the way you talk, you'll come up with phrases that are really helpful. And you might even, this happens to me, you come up with an illustration just on the fly. And you find yourself saying it's a bit like, and you say, and you're like, rah, I'm going to put that in. That's a good illustration. And you put it in. You're getting a chance to practice that here. The other beauty of this is you might give an illustration, and as you're saying it, you're like, that don't really work. And now you cross that out, and you're like, I need to come up with a better illustration. Better you do that in that situation than in the pulpit. Now, what I found is that when I used to just type my notes up and read them, I wasn't always so aware that stuff didn't work when I'm preaching it. But when you're in your living room preaching to an imaginary crowd, then you realize, that don't really work. Or you realize, I don't actually understand this anyway, so I'm struggling to teach it without notes because I don't really understand it. So I need to do more exegesis. Some people are laughing because they've been there. Some of us have been there in the pulpit, and we're preaching and we're like, I don't understand this. And they say that if there's a mist in the pulpit, there's a fog in the pews. So if you're like, I'm a bit hazy on this, everyone else is really hazy. They're like, what is he going on about? So this process is helpful for ironing out those kinks. Okay, we're now on step 10. Repeat this as many times as necessary until you can do it with just a Bible and no notes. So, after you've done this a few times, right, you'll be amazed. After you've done this a few times, you won't need any notes. As long as you can remember your intro, as long as you remember how to start, then you're okay. It's a bit like, so I've got an automatic car, for health reasons, I've had an automatic car for quite a few years now. And there was a time a while back where I needed to borrow someone's manual car. And it's fine. I went up to their flat, got the keys off them. I was like, see ya. Take good care of my car. Like, no problem. I get in their car. They're watching from their balcony, And I get in their car and I'm like, I turn the keys, and it's like, and then I'm trying, and I can't remember how you start a manual car. I'm like, I know how to do it in automatic, and I'm like, and for a couple of minutes, the car's like lurching forwards, lurching backwards, kind of thing, like, and I'm like, oh my days, this poor person's watching from the balcony, thinking I've just given them my car for the day, and then I got it in gear, because I had to reverse out first, which made it harder, I got it in proper reverse, I reverse turned, then I did the clutch, put in first gear, got it to the biting point, drove forwards, and then I was like, I know what I'm doing now. I'd remembered the starting moves for driving a manual, and then, boom, it all went into place. As long as you can remember the intro, and you've been doing this process, you will then find it all starts clicking into place. And then you can go through it without notes, and just with your Bible. So here's the thing, people say to me, you don't use notes. What a lot of people don't realize is I use a Bible. And apart from when I'm doing topical, which is harder with this process, because you've got to remember what all the different verses that you're going to. But if you're teaching people verse by verse through a text, the Bible's doing all the heavy lifting. The Bible's showing you your structure. And even if you forgot everything, you can actually now freestyle it, because you know this text so well. You can just freestyle it and go through it. So that's the system. Stage 11, pray. Firstly, in response to the sermon, preach it to yourself so that it's real to you. Secondly, pray that God would help you preach it. There's a real danger of thinking, I've got all my help in there. I've got my pictures, my links to FCF. This is going to be a good sermon. There's a real danger of thinking that. We've got to realize I can't do nothing without Christ. I need Christ's Holy Spirit working in me, enabling me to do this. Thirdly, pray that God would give people ears to hear, because you can preach a banging sermon and everyone's got a hard heart and they don't listen to it. So pray about those things. Any questions about this process?
Any place for being spontaneous?
Any place for being spontaneous? That's a very good question. Okay. I think this would be dependent on individual to individual. I'm very often spontaneous in my sermons. On Sunday morning, I'll drop it. We see this in the case study later. I'll drop in illustrations that I hadn't planned. They just come to me. I see someone react a certain way to something I've said, and then I realize I've got to help this person right now. This has just touched a nerve about an emotional issue in their life. I've got to bring in the comfort of the gospel here and minister to them. I see someone else being really hard-hearted and being like a Pharisee, and then I'm like, I'm going to come at them right now. I'm going to warn them, you're on the edge. Come away from the edge. So I will be spontaneous. But I see the process I go through, what Richard Garnett said to me was he said, you want a bank on either side. And I found that really helpful. In my mind, all the exegesis I've done and all the planning I've done gives me a bank, a river bank on either side for me to flow here and move a little bit, but I know my banks. So I've already, like with my illustrations and that, I've already been like, wait a minute, does this illustration teach the wrong thing? Does this end up teaching modalism, an incorrect view of the Trinity? If it does, I've got to throw it out. I've already thought through those things, so then when I come to preach, if an idea comes into my head, I might be like, wait a minute, does that communicate the wrong thing? I've already got my exegesis, all my systematic theology and biblical theology that I trimmed the fat of and I discarded. That's still in my memory banks, which means it protects me from going off the edge and saying something off key. Now, here's the thing. Even when I preach with notes, I used to do this, and sometimes we would have to edit bits out. Because spontaneously, even when I'm using my notes, spontaneously I'd say something and later I'd realise, that's not quite accurate. So we would cut it out of the video. But you can't cut it out of people's memories who've been sitting there, unfortunately. But you can say to them, I made a mistake. Sorry, please forgive me.
How long does this process usually take you from the start of writing it all out, memorising it? And has the process become quicker for you since you first started doing it?
The first time I did this, I'd say each time to memorize it. When I say memorize it, I don't memorize it word for word. In my head, I get an idea of what all the elps are. And then I kind of sort of like freestyle it. So I'm not like going word for word how I've written it, if you see what I mean. It comes out different every time. But the first time it took a lot longer, and then it's got shorter and shorter over the years. I often don't do the steps thing. And we do a case study later so I can show you the process I go through. But the timings are different for different people. But I'd say the first time you're doing it, for doing the step thing, I'd say, budget to give yourself like 4 hours doing that. It doesn't have to be in a block, it could be one bit at a time, Some of you will find in half an hour you've got it locked. Others will be like, in 2 hours I got it. Some of you might be like, it took me 4 hours. I can't really answer for you, I'm afraid.
I guess as you learn that, like you said, the FEB, the ELP and all that, it kind of, when that becomes second nature, I guess this would become quicker.
Yes, yeah. And all this stuff I've been teaching you gets quicker the more you do it, definitely.
How many days or what's the time scale that you do this before you preach? Like a day before? Or?
The time scale, I would do it a couple of days before. Maybe the day before. It depends on your schedule. The day before I preach is my family day. So it's normally when my week hasn't gone that well, which often is when we haven't planned out our week that well. So when I haven't planned out my week that well, I end up on my day off doing this stage. I don't think that's ideal. I think always prepare in advance. And especially if you're preaching, try not to be one of those preachers that says to the church you're preaching at, I'm sorry, something came up, because that really messes people up. Plan your life so that when stuff comes up, it doesn't impact other people. That's a whole time management issue that's beyond the scope of this course, but that's something that we've done in our internship training about don't let stuff get in the urgent part of your life. When it's in the urgent part of your life, other people get messed up and you get messed up. Make sure stuff gets taken care of before it goes in the urgent thing. And then when stuff that can only be in the urgent thing, like someone breaks their leg and you've got to rush them to hospital, that goes in the urgent thing, but the other stuff already got put in its proper place, so stuff goes more smoothly.
In terms of preaching and communicating, would you suggest staying in one place, like the article kind of suggests stay in one place?
That's a very good point. I found it interesting that TED Talks say stay in one place. There's some people that do a lot of rocking, which is very distracting. Some people do a lot of back and forth, and that's distracting. Some people walk around quite a bit. For health reasons, I move a little bit because I can't. My body has a problem standing, And if I stand for too long, it just causes me a lot of problems later. So I try to move a little bit, but I also try not to move too much because it's a pain for the cameraman to go like that. I would say listen to the advice of TED Talks, but also think it through in your own context and culture. You know, maybe people love it when people walk around and that, because some of these things are going to be cultural as well. You know, there's a lot of and that's worth thinking through.
It's funny you say that because I had a conversation with a middle class lady who's a Christian, and she said, when she gave me advice, she said, stay in one place, don't move around, just like stick in one place. And I know in my culture, the preachers tend to move around a bit and interact and that. So yeah, I think definitely cultural implications have an effect on that.
Okay, what you're going to do now is you're going to try this. So here's what you're going to do, yeah? You're going to do step 1 with your intro, yeah? So you've got your notes, yeah? You're going to write, if you haven't already got a heading to remind you what it's about, write in that heading, yeah? And then what you're going to do is you're going to stand up and you're going to try doing that intro. And then afterwards, you're going to try doing it, you know, first time glancing with your notes, the second time glancing at your notes, but not as much. And then like the third time, you're just going to have a piece of paper with the heading on, and you're going to stand up and try and do that, just with the intro. And then, I'm going to get you trying to teach it to the person next to you. So, for the benefit of people watching the video, we just had a volunteer come up and actually do their intro, just from doing that practice there. And so, on the whole, how did you guys find it? Just give some words to describe the intro that Dan gave. Engaging. Yeah. Energetic. Relatable. A word that I want to use is natural. Natural. Now, here's what I want to get across with this whole note thing, yeah? This is what I want to say. If you, and in your churches, you can get away from notes, I guarantee you will be more natural. I guarantee it. And God made you a certain way to reflect God in a certain way. And there's things in your personalities that reflect God. And that other people in the church don't have those same personalities. And God's going to use that, yeah, to communicate his word to people. In my opinion, yeah, now, I can't talk about everyone, but in my opinion, yeah, in the urban context, in the UK, in general, we like to talk. And a lot of us have the gift of the gab. And a lot of us are amusing to some of our friends who aren't from urban contexts at how we talk about stuff. What I want to say is that I think what's happened for a lot of us is then we've become Christians, we've done some Bible teaching class, and we've been taught from someone from another culture, this is how you teach the Bible, and it's heavily dependent on notes. And we've adopted that and said, yes, this is how to do it. This is the right way to do it. This person taught me the Bible and they taught me to use notes. And for a lot of us, we're using a technique that is not very conducive to our culture. I want to suggest that we play to our strengths and that we can communicate in a way that we communicate well in our own culture and that people in our culture are like, yeah, I feel them, what they're saying right now. Okay, so I know for some of us it's paradigm shift, but I want to suggest if you wrestle with the leaving the notes thing, I don't think you're wrestling with something that you grew up with. I think you're wrestling with something that you adopted. And for a lot of us, there's been certain changes in our lives. Maybe it's the first church you got saved into, or maybe it's the first church where you heard the Bible taught properly for the first time. We can have an attachment to things that came with that and be like, yeah, this is how to do it. And I just want to suggest that you consider there's an alternative that's better for your context. Whilst you're doing this module, I'm saying teach it this way. When you've passed the course, you can go off and decide for yourself what you're going to do. But what Dan did there was an excellent example of natural Bible teaching. And I bet, you see, we should have done a test. We should have last term got Dan to type up a sermon with his notes, not tell him anything about ELP, not tell him anything about the notes thing, and got him to teach it, and then done a side-by-side comparison. And I bet you any money that the one with Dan in front of notes would have been dry in comparison to what he just did there. Bet you any money. What Dan did there was great, and it was Dan. I loved it. It was Dan. But the method I'm teaching is trying to get you to be who God made you to be when you're teaching the Bible, not copying a style of a different culture that ain't you. But if after doing this, you then decide in your context, no, notes is us, we're going to do notes, I'm cool with that as well. As long as you can come to me and say, we thought it through and these are our reasons, and it's not just, well, we're doing this because someone taught us this years ago.